Hello, everybody. It's me, Vie Darling. Not loving the background, but it's okay because that's not the point of why I gathered you all here today. This video is for the Pisces full moon that we are coming up on, and I just want to find some sweet, chill sounds to play in the background while I do this. Okay, there we go. To keep me grounded. And so, yeah, we have a Pisces full moon tomorrow, the 20th, and shortly thereafter we have the autumnal equinox in Libra. It's always in Libra, it never ever changes. Well, that's not actually true because that's the whole reason why there's sidereal and tropical astrology. But the point is, a few days after, on the 22nd, like 2 days after, we have the autumnal equinox in Libra, if we're speaking about tropical astrology. However, we're in this practice shifting into sidereal. So it's actually going to be in Virgo, which makes a lot more sense because it is kind of a giving of a birth. However, we're not going to split hairs. I did write some stuff in my notes about the difference between sidereal and tropical. And for me personally, I feel like sidereal astrology is really what's going on in the internal. It's more like the divine feminine, I would say, where like it's the internal processing of what's going on and it's the underlying, like what's under the surface. Whereas tropical astrology is kind of how it manifests. So for example, if you look at the chart, which I'm going to pull up, I'm going to just make sure that it's in whole sign because that's also the thing that we do here. So if you look at the chart, you will see that we have Chiron in Aries in the 11th house in tropical astrology. However, and how I would say, and this has been for months, how I would express this as manifesting is a healing of self, of how we express ourselves, of how we go about the world, and our relationship with ourselves holistically. Because as we've spoken about in this practice, our relationship with absolutely everything that exists outside of us is predicated upon our relationship with ourselves. So the self is Aries, ruled by Mars, and then relationships are the next step, and that relates to Taurus, and so on and so forth until we get back to ourselves. And this is important to understand because before there is a self, there is the collective, and there is spirit. Why? What does this mean? It means that, and I've said this on here before, I've said this on my Instagram before, the collective presupposes the self. There is no individual without there being a collective. There is no individual without there being a group. That literally could not exist, because the distinction, there would be absolutely no distinction, right? So there has to be a collective, there has to be a group before there is a self. And one thing that I wrote in my notes also is that I think that there's a big problem within Western tradition that just forgets and kind of like does not acknowledge the 0 point, the mathematical fact of 0. And I think of 0 as being like that like portal that I was talking about, the portal of Libra, or really let's just call it the portal of the equinox, because it doesn't really have anything to do with Libra. It just, Libra happens to be where the sun is in tropical astrology, when the sun, I want to say crosses the ecliptic, but I cannot say that for sure. What I do know is that it is the balancing of day and night, and the split of the season. And that's what tropical astrology is attached to. It's attached to the equinoxes. However, it does not take into account the precession of equinoxes. So that being said, where 2,000 years ago, the autumnal equinox may have been in Libra, it is now in Virgo, and that is because of the precession of equinoxes. So it is more scientifically and astronomically correct to use sidereal astrology. And why am I saying this again now? As I was saying about the 0 point, 0 is like the new moon, for instance, and people will be like, oh my God, the full moon, gotta do intention setting, manifestation, blah, blah, blah. If you're really trying to manifest and you're really trying to set intentions and you're doing that around the full moon, I'm a little bit confused. I don't think that you really are that tuned into how these cycles and these planets and these natural rhythms of the planet work, because the new moon is actually the most fertile ground for sowing. The new moon is the time when we sow new intentions. For me, it's when I feel most primal. It's when my cycle has synced up to the new moon as opposed to the full moon. And I think a lot of people who trek the dark goddess journey are more synced up to the new moon. It's deep, it's dark, it's primal. And that to me is 0. When people talk about space, for instance, it's like, space, it's empty out there. It's like, no, it's only empty in our 3D perception. But once we break past the fourth dimension of time, space is full. And that is because at any given point in time, a space may or may not be full, like may or may not have something there, but at any other given point in time, it would. And I know that I've done this before, but for example, all the space around my hand right now, or this space right here, is empty right now, but now it's not. This space right here is empty, but now it's not. Right? And besides that, it's actually not empty, because there's plenty of like gases that I cannot see floating there, particles that I cannot see floating there. Space is not empty. And that's how I feel about 0. And it's also how I feel about Pisces. Pisces is not just the end of the zodiac, but it's also actually the beginning, because Pisces is the collective consciousness. It is the cosmic sea. It is the primordial ooze. It is the amniotic fluid of the great divine mother's womb. That's what Pisces is. It is what we are born from. So that child that is Aries comes out of something. It comes out of Pisces. And so upon death, going through the process of death that takes place in this last part of the zodiac, through that process of like spirit, a different type of engagement with consciousness, which is much more ideological and spiritual, versus like the primordial, like emotional, sensual experience, I would say. Yeah, it's very much more sensual experience of consciousness. That is Pisces. We have Aquarius. And so there's no end to the circle, there's no end to the circle of life. There's no end to the circle of the zodiac. That's why it's a circle. It's infinite. It's a cosmic loop. That's really important to understand, because we are ascending into new echelons of consciousness with this full moon in Pisces preceding the equinox, because I'm not going to say it's the start of Libra season. Tropically, it's the start of Libra season. And so, yes, I'm going to do a video for it. But sidereally, it's not. And so now, as I was talking about the primal expression of self, the expression of self, which is action, Sanskrit word karma, that's going to become important in Aries. We're going to switch over to the sidereal chart, because look where Chiron is in the sidereal chart. Chiron's actually in Pisces. So what was I saying? Our relationship with ourself predicates all of our external relationships, but ultimately our relationship with spirit underlies our relationship with self. If we hate ourselves, that innately has to do with, actually, I'll take a step back. I believe it was 𝗪ǐ𝘁 who's the father of sociology, who believed that early people's, like early civilizations' conception of God was actually the collective, because if you were cast out of the collective, you were almost certain to die. It was very unlikely that you would live without the collective. And if you did, you'd become like a feral child, especially because us Homo sapiens as primates are social animals. So there would be a devolution. So you can see why Durkheim would posit that the idea of God in these earlier civilizations was the collective, was society. However, I don't believe that that's true, and I personally would not like take a European person's perspective on indigeneity ever. Like, I wouldn't give it that much credit, I guess is the word that I want to say. Yeah, I wouldn't give it that much credit. But so Emil Durkheim had this idea that the collective was, our very early human idea of God. I would actually suggest that beyond the tangible, like human collective, it would more so be collective consciousness and, the collective spirit. It's, however, yes, the collective of other humans in their physicality is a power greater than each and every single one of us as individuals. But beyond that, beyond that, there is the spiritual. Beyond that, there is consciousness, right? And this really gets more into the Akashic records and this great cosmic sea, the sea of consciousness that I'm talking about, that has to do with Pisces. So I hope that that's making sense. But suffice it to say, Chiron. So if we have issues with the idea of a higher power, or with the idea of spirituality or whatever, of course, we're going to have issues with ourselves. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all divine children of God. And that's the most important thing to understand about this full moon that we're experiencing. I want to talk about the fact that the sun is conjunct vertex Mars and Mercury in Virgo in the 4th house at 4 degrees and 4 seconds. So that's 444 already right there, which is pretty important. Just as far as numerology is concerned, 444 equals 12, which it's not really a master number. 11's a master number, but 12th dimensional Christ consciousness, 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 houses. 12 is a deeply, 3 times 4, 12 is a deeply powerful spiritual number. And I would say that in this case, it does represent endings. But what I wrote in my notes is that we are being presented a new way of doing things as we further ascend into higher realms of consciousness, cosmic consciousness, this influencing our own levels of consciousness. And that definitely has to do with what I was saying about 12th dimensional Christ consciousness. And so phase 154 of the Sabian symbols, Virgo at 4 degrees, where the sun is black and white children play together happily. The keynote, the overcoming of socio-cultural prejudices. So I guess I'll just read what it says. Freedom from all the forms, biases, and idiosyncrasies of the particular culture and class in which one has been born and educated, in a sine qua non of the consciousness truly on the path. And that is the middle path that they talk about in, is it Buddhism or Taoism? Anyway, the ideal of universal brotherhood underlies all great spiritual teachings, for they all are like branches of the one tree in their divine state. Person, human, in their divine state. This does not mean there are no racial differences or gender differences or biological differences, let's say, but rather that these differences have a functional value in terms of the whole organism of humans and of the planet Earth. Anthropologically speaking, the idea is that like our human bodies adapted through the process of evolution to being in different environments because we humans did not stay in one place, besides which the earth itself shifted and changed as it does. And this is exactly why I do not believe that this is the end of the planet. If anything, it's going to be the end of humans on the planet. And you know what? If it's that bad, then good riddance. Either way, I don't believe that that's going to happen. At this 4th stage, the basic technique which applies to all truly spiritual progress is clearly stated. Every human being should be seen, approached, and warmly met as a child of God, or in less religious terms, as an exemplar of human. Such a status gives to every social and interpersonal group the character of a brotherhood. I don't like the way that this is written just because it's so patriarchal, but that's not the point. The point is, we're talking about Pisces because that's where the moon is, and it just so happens that Chiron is there. And this 4 degrees of Virgo, which the moon is at 4 degrees of Pisces. So those two things have to do with one another. That is the closing out of a cycle. The sun is shining its light on, and I would say giving life to and giving expression to this way of social integration. And this higher understanding that all of these social mores are superfluous at the end of the day, and they also don't actually, they're not real. We talk about this a lot in this practice with spiritual abolition, which is to say that the false matrix of society, specifically colonialism, indoctrinates us and embeds these therefore embedding these ideologies and ideas about hierarchy, and where we are placed in this erroneous hierarchy based on based on these unfounded and actually disproven ideas. For example, racism has literally been proven to be, like, the ideas that underlie white supremacy and racism have literally scientifically been debunked. And there is historical evidence of the fact that this was created a few hundred years ago in order to oppress a race of people and put them into a caste system and create a sociological underclass and labor class, because exploitation, point blank period. What this says to me is what we already know, which is that all of this is untrue. However, I would say with the ending of this cycle that we are coming out on the other side of, it is this realization that we can no longer walk through the world casting these aspersions on others. Like, we can no longer walk through the world deciding that this person does not deserve unconditional love. This person does not deserve to live in their truth. You know what I mean? And these systems, the system of colonialism and its 5 pillars that we talk about in this practice, have a way of making each and every single one of us, that does not exclude white people, cisgendered men, heterosexual people, rich people, whatever. It does not exclude any of those. Each and every single one of us indoctrinated into the system can find at least one thing about ourselves that we hate and abhor, that makes us unworthy of unconditional love. Each and every single one of us. And that being as unconditional love and harmony and unity is the nature of this universe. And for me, as I frame it, unconditional love being my one pillar of my higher power, and integrity being the other. And those two things, that intersection of that is my idea of what God energy would be. These ideologies of colonialism seek to take us away from that. For example, as a Black person in this system, I could feel that, you know, because of the things that happen in the world around me, God or higher power or whatever you want to call it hates me, or there is no spirit, none of that's real, or whatever, what have you, because I have to suffer like this, or I'm not good enough to have these. I could buy into these ideologies and be like, oh, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve those things because I'm Black, or because I'm a biological female, or because I'm queer, or any of those things. Like, I don't deserve to have love. Like, don't you know what I am? I don't deserve to have love. And it could even be none of those things. I mean, that's just the most simple biological reasonings, but like, it could be, you know, absolutely anything, anything that causes a neurotic obsession with self and feeling like, you know, we are apart from instead of a part of. We don't deserve to be in relation to the collective in our authentic truth. Anything that keeps us from that. Each and every single one of us has that, as I said, and it is because of, you know, maybe that's part of human nature, but I don't think that at this point in time, it's possible to even really say what human nature is outside of, you know, our like biology as primates, because of indoctrination into colonialism. And because of the myriad abuses and exploitations that have occurred throughout our catalog, like our human story together, you know? And so for me, this question of Chiron being in Pisces, it's like being able to trust spirit, being able to trust my higher power, being able, I also identify like my ancestors, whatever it is in the unseen, whatever guiding force you believe in, that underlies things. It could even be the laws of physics, you know, whatever. I don't care what it is. For me, I'm just gonna make it super simple. And sometimes I'll call it spirit, God, universe, whatever. I don't care. But whatever is holding us back from being able to believe that we belong, that we deserve to live, and we deserve to live a happy life, a peaceful life, a fulfilling life, because that's simply untrue. That's being cast out now. That's what's rising to the surface. And so it may be super frustrating because all of these things that like we cannot stand to deal with, our shadow is coming to the surface to be cleared. And so like it could be, you know, whatever negative narratives have been like embedded in us are being brought to the surface and having light shown upon them. I mean, we have the moon here, so it is going to have to do with feelings regarding our brokenheartedness in relation to the collective, in relation to feeling worthy, to feeling valuable, to feeling valid. And how do we heal that? But with unconditional love, by accepting it, accepting that we are worthy, accepting that we are valid, that we are valuable, that the world would not be what it is without us. It actually reminds me of that movie, A Christmas Story, where he's like, oh, the world would be better off without me. And then he like wants to kill himself. And he ends up, you know, an angel shows him what the world would be like without him. And it's horrible. And that's what we have to think about, because when I say like, oh, focusing on the miracles instead of the tragedies, yeah, the miracles in our lives, but it's also important to think about, you know, the miracles that we can be in other people's lives. People may not always like us. They may not always agree with us. And this is something that I put in my notes actually. So I think I'd even just want to go and read what I said from my notes. I don't see it, but Pisces is about harmony, and that requires, I mean, it doesn't necessarily, yeah, it does actually. It requires unconditional love because that underlies acceptance. And when we have unconditional love, there can be harms and abuses, and we can forgive on a spiritual level, which doesn't mean that, oh, like if we accept something for what it is, it doesn't mean that we like it. It doesn't mean that we condone it. It doesn't mean that we're making excuses for it. It simply means like, yeah, that's what happened. And that has a lot to do with this Neptune being retrograde in Aquarius in the 9th house. It is giving energy to Pisces because Neptune rules Pisces. So that Aquarian energy is also affecting Chiron, and it's also affecting the moon. And Aquarius is being affected by Uranus being retrograde in Aries. So this Aryan energy is coming. This is a force within us of like, the energy of Uranus is breaking down all of those barriers, what I'll refer to as barriers of recovery, barriers of life, barriers of wellness, of joy. We talk in this practice about building palaces versus prisons. And I really would say, if you haven't already, if you are subscribed to the Patreon, then you do have free access to the Saturnalia workbook that we did last, that I created last solstice, the winter solstice. I would suggest that if you haven't done it, do it. I would suggest that if you've already done it, go back and look at it again, especially for this equinox, because we're halfway through the solstices, which means that it's the perfect time for you to check in with yourself and see what needs to be adjusted, what is happening, like, you know, course correct what's been put in motion. But this Aryan energy that is supercharging Uranus, which is giving that energy to Pisces, which is giving that energy, to Neptune, which is giving that energy to Chiron and the moon. And the 10th house is showing us, like, honestly, what we can and can't accept. For me, this has looked like certain people in my life who piss me the F off are doing the things that piss me off. And even if they're not doing the things, I'm just thinking about the things that they do that piss me off. Or I'm thinking about people who have hurt me in the past and how I feel, you know, I deserve to hurt them. And ultimately, understanding that I'm a part of the collective means understanding that if I hurt them, I hurt myself, if we want to be real selfish. But what this moon really is about, and what this Virgo season is really about, especially sidereal Virgo season, which is going to be about halfway into Libra season, at least, tropical Libra season, that is understanding that this is about service to the collective. This is how we are of service to others, by doing the healing work on ourselves. It's about healing our relationship with ourself with a capital S, our sacred self, understanding that you are sacred. And if you are sacred, because the divine spark that we talked about back at the vernal equinox, that divine spark lives inside of everyone else. Hey, it lives inside of you too. It lives inside of you. Hey, it lives inside of everyone else too. And everyone truly is just doing their best. Even the worst people on the planet are a product of not only their environment, but let's also take in, like, our collective history into defining what an environment is. Some of the people that we may find to be the most repugnant, horrible people, the most amoral or immoral people, disagreeable, dishonorable, disgusting people, they're still children of God too, even if they don't see it. It's really not about whether or not they see it. It's really about whether or not you see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And if you're still willing to perpetuate harm, knowing the experience of receiving harm, being on the receiving end of harm, if you're still willing to perpetuate harm, do so knowing you do so knowing the consequences of your actions. You do so knowingly. It's not done in ignorance anymore. Where they may have been doing it in ignorance, for you, it's not. And you must know the law of karma, action. In my notes, whenever I study Aquarius, like, it like becomes like this big biblical thing now. But and y'all know I love Bible magic, so it is what it is. But when I was looking at Uranus retrograde in Aries in opposition to Venus in Libra, and Venus is at home in Libra. And I do want to talk about this in the 5th house. She's at home, so equilibrium is being struck. However, if we desire to save face and people please, which is a very, very Libran thing to do, and then come around the backside with the knife, we ought to know that Uranus will eviscerate us. It's not going down like that. We're not going to be able, rather, if we really want to attract the things that we really want, we really do have to make some really big changes to the way we go about life. I wrote in my notes, tell the truth, do it with compassion, bury your dead, grieve the shift, but keep on moving with faith, with honor, with integrity. If we're too afraid of what we may lose in the process of being authentic and living in our integrity as children of God, walking a spiritual life as spiritual beings, as awakened and ascended spiritual beings, especially, you know, you're only going to be hurting yourself because you're holding yourself back, but also you're just you're fighting a losing battle. To just get aligned with how you are changing and how you are shifting, how your consciousness is shifting and changing. To get aligned with that is the best thing that you can do. And so, yes, it must be through telling the truth and accepting the consequences. Because it is a stepping stone to a life beyond your wildest dreams. By bury your dead, I mean those old parts of ourselves are so hard to let go of that we may identify with. We may identify holistically with the pain that we have experienced, with the trauma that we may have gone through. We may identify with all of that, but at the end of the day, we don't have to associate ourselves with that old narrative. And this is why I mentioned the verse that came to me was Isaiah 43 verse 19 to 21. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye know it not? Shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And this has everything, absolutely everything to do with what I wrote in the Saturnalia intention setting and manifestation workbook about the third eye, the ajna, and about that being the fountain of light as we enter into the age of light, the fountain of life, and how we have to tap into that, how we have to clear our third eye. And the thing about it is when we're buying into these low vibrational, shadow empire, demonic prescriptions for what life should be or has to be like. Look at all of this stuff. We have 2 malefics and a benefic in Capricorn. That's big deal energy in the 8th house. So it has to do with transformation. And it has to do with personal power. Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And it also has to do with the collective. We are having this great revelation of what the structures of the system are truly and what the impact of that is. And the most important thing is not going around and yelling at everybody else you're not doing it right. It's really about looking in the mirror and seeing how we are failing to show up in the ways in which we know that we ought to be, and where we're falling prey to doing what is easy instead of what is right. When we do that work on ourselves, when we do that shadow work on ourselves, what is on the other side of the shadow work is the light. And that light allows us to see ourselves fully and clearly instead of in the funhouse, the warped funhouse mirror of society, which is to say it allows us to see that divine spark within ourselves, to see the value within ourselves, to see the beauty, to see the beauty within ourselves, which allows us to see the beauty that is in life that we may access if we allow ourselves to, by really getting out of our own way. And so, you know, those old stories, those old narratives, those old patterns has everything to do with Capricorn, but then Saturn also rules Aquarius. And Aquarius, we're talking about like doing something different, advancing, innovating, improving, clearing away the old that doesn't work. We know what doesn't work on a mass scale, but what isn't working within ourselves. And this is why the practice of personal decolonization and spiritual, and that's what I call spiritual abolition, is so important. Because honestly, when I like this idea of perfection that is a part of colonialism, it does not exist. And it has a lot to do with Virgo. Virgo is always looking to meet this perfect ideal, which is self-destructive because it doesn't exist. And so one grinds away at oneself, attempting to become this perfectly polished thing, but then we lose what makes us most important, like what makes us most unique and therein most valuable, right? So it is, this is how, as I said, this is how we are of service to the collective, as being of is by being of service to ourselves. And I do think that I said this in the last reading. I do think that I said this in the last reading. And that what I said was, don't, oh, I said this in the reading that's on IGTV. Don't go, like, keep your crew clean. If you can tell that people are of not of service to your spirit, you don't want to rock with them. And how do you know that someone is not of service to your spirit? Because they're not of service to their spirit. And you can see that in people because they are not of service to the collective, you know, when you're being rude or mean or projecting or manipulative, an energy vampire in any way, causing harm in any way, you know, and not practicing atonement. These are all ways that you can see that like people are not of service to this, to their spirit. Not practicing empathy, not at least attempting to orient themselves toward this like 12th dimensional ideal. And so yeah, this equilibrium that's being struck, it's gonna happen. We just have to give ourselves to it. And it's a painful process because as I said, like it's really hard to let go of those old ways of being, but we must. And we have Pluto here, which Pluto has a lot to do with expulsion and excrement, and getting rid of the waste. So Pluto being in Capricorn, retrograde is purging the waste and the shadow and the sickness from within our spirit, Scorpio, so that we can come out the other side squeaky, brand new, blessed up Pisces. All that crap that's keeping us in like Jupiter retrograde here, it's like pushing past those boundaries, expanding us. We can trust this process. And so yeah, like I said, Fortuna is in Sagittarius. I didn't say that, but it is. Fortuna is in Sagittarius, and Pluto is actually at 0 degrees and 12 seconds of Capricorn. I don't know for sure that it will retrograde into Sagittarius because Pluto moves quite slowly. And I believe it goes direct in October, so I don't know. But what I do know is Fortuna is in Sagittarius in the 7th house, and it says go big or go home. There's no home to go back to. As I said, and as I've been saying for years, the old paradigm was dead and dying, and it is being swept away. It is being cleared out by this force of, the way I see it is like this cosmic river, you know, this flowing through the crown chakra, through the ajna. That's what it is. That's that fountain. That's what's going on there. The river, the river being made in the desert, the way being made in the wilderness. You know, it shall spring forth, and it is. And it's, so we must really do a lot of work on our crown chakras, clearing our crown chakras, being of service to them by, like, I don't know, I would suggest meditation, very, very important. Energy cleansing, but meditation is the most important. Sitting quietly, you know, being very conscious about the media that we take in, getting grounded, doing grounding meditations, you know, breathing. A lot of intentional breathing is going to help. Yeah, because there's a lot of light codes coming in that are going to be shifting our consciousness, and that's going to shift our perspective and the way that we see things. That can be very jarring, and that's what I mean by like bury your dead. And it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be, you know, whatever. It's okay to feel your feelings. Grieve, because something has died within you, and it's okay to grieve. It's important, it's necessary to do this grief work on oneself, but keep on moving with faith. And that's what I saw in here, was like Sodom and Gomorrah, the pillar of salt. I don't remember who it was in Sodom and Gomorrah, but his wife was told, don't look back as you are escaping the city. And she looked back and she became a pillar of salt. Or 𝗪cidhe and Orpheus. Orpheus was told not to look back at Eurydice as they were leaving the underworld, or else he would not be allowed, or he would lose Eurydice. She wouldn't be able to come back to the land of the living with him. And he couldn't help himself. They were right there, and he couldn't help but look back at her. And he lost her. To look back with longing would be for naught. Cast aside nostalgia, for it is a liar, a lie. Cancer in the 2nd house, that nostalgia that we have about our past relationships and our past way of life, that's BS. That is our shadow trying to trick us so that we will continue to hold space for it. What is really there? Remember the reality, the emotional reality of our experiences, because that's what really matters. It doesn't matter what lies our minds spin us to keep us from doing the scary thing. Let go of the past, for it was corrupt and rotten. Anything that was in that time, if it's meant to come into this time because it does its healing and it does its growing on its own, it's meant to find you in this time, it will. But if it doesn't, then it's not meant to. And thank spirit, thank universe that it doesn't find you, because it's not for you, and it's for the best, you know. As I said, there's no home to go back to. Build your palace or perish in your prison. It is your choice. And it really is one or the other. In absolutely no uncertain terms, we are being revealed to these realities. If you are somebody who identifies as a light worker, as an empath, intuitive, psychic person, whatever, star seed, what have you, you really got to get your act together, because at the end of the day, it's only going to be like, it is possible to miss the boat on it. It is possible, because it just means that you're going to perpetuate more harm in your life and keep yourself from experiencing joy when you could be. And sure, you can hop on the boat at any time, but like, you'll have that much more wreckage to clear for not leaning into these shifts and these changes. So Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter, as I said, all retrograde in Capricorn, are activating a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to cast off the death shroud of colonial oppression, vampiric indoctrination, which is narcissism, or perpetuating our own abuse and accessing our own healing. The Virgo and stellium, this stellium right here, especially with Mars in its home sign of Virgo, really is supporting this. The moon and Chiron and Pisces support this, which means that Chiron has actually been healing our spiritual malady and disconnect, and it's been healing our primal wounds and our relationship with ourselves, which is the tropical Aries, as I said. And it's also removing fear, which has been the primary tool of our oppression, perpetuating the past paradigm, where we fear that we won't be taken care of, that we won't be loved, that we will not have our needs met. If we just act from faith, we will find ourselves to be pleasantly surprised. Even if in that moment, if it's like, for example, oh, I want to date this person, and then you ask them and they say no, and that sucks because you took a leap of faith. So the reality is, you no longer have to pine away over them, and you can find someone who perhaps down the line you find the exact right person for you, and you can be really grateful that you didn't get caught up in a relationship that really wasn't to your benefit. And also not pining away, and wasting your time on nostalgic fantasy. It's not even really nostalgia, it's just fantasy. I think that's really all that I have. I think I would just be saying things kind of over and over. I think the best place to look for information, if you subscribe to the third tier, I put my notes, and I think that the notes are really great. And so yeah, that's gonna be it for the astrology. And I love you all truly and deeply, and I will do a little bit of a spread for this, for the moon tier, which is our second tier. So I hope I said something helpful, and I hope that I've said something clarifying. Yeah, okay, bye.